Welcome back to Team FastEddy. Today we're going to attempt to show you how to solder on the bullet connectors that are provided with the Castle Creations conversion kit for the HPI Baja. And the first thing that we're going to suggest is that if you do not have the proper soldering equipment, if you're just trying to use a little pencil solder gun, probably not going to work very well. You need some good sustainable heat. The little pencil soldering irons just can't sustain the heat for this big of a mass to solder everything properly. So if that's the case, check with your local hobby shop or electronic shop. A lot of those guys will do it for no charge or charge a real small fee to do it. We are choosing the Hakko soldering iron, which we've had for years and years, and we've used it and like it. Along with that, we're also using the 908 handle. See if I can show it to you here. The 908 handle, which allows us to put a broader tip on there, which helps sustain the heat. So those are tools of choice here. Soldering is all by feel, and it's really hard to talk your way through soldering and explaining how to do it. The bullet connector that we're using has two ends. It has a larger opening and a smaller opening, and the smaller opening has a little vent or porthole here. And that's the side that we're going to be putting the wire into. I'm going to use a third hand here and clip that in. Holds it out of the way. If you don't have a third hand, you can use a pair of pliers with a rubber band or whatnot. But it's always nice to have a third hand when soldering. And again, they're real cheap pieces to buy. We've got our soldering iron nice and hot. We're going to go ahead and make sure that we have a clean tip to work with. And the first thing that we're going to do is take a look at the wire here, and it's already tinned. And what that means is it's already got solder melted into it thoroughly. If you've cut your wires and are making them shorter, make sure that you properly tin the end and go from there. The next thing we're going to do is tin the inside of the connector, and what we're going to do is actually put a pool of solder in there. For whatever reason, I'm using this really thin solder, and it's almost too thin for the job, but that's all I have available to me right now. So what I've done is wadded up a little piece of solder, and I'm going to put it in there. You're going to go ahead and just touch the side of the connector with your soldering iron to heat it up. However, the first thing that you want to do, you don't want to use a dry tip. So we're going to tin the end of the tip with some solder, and basically what that does is it gives us a better heat connection. We're just going to hold that on the side of the billet connector. Trust me when I tell you, if you press harder, it does not get hotter. So just very lightly just put it on there. You can see the solder melt. And what I'm going to do is fill that up to the vent hole. So I'm going to need a little bit more in there. So I'm going to go ahead and feed some more solder in there. And like I said, I'm using really thin solder here. So it looks like I'm putting a lot in there, but I'm not. Okay, it's filled basically up to the hole, which should allow us enough solder to do the job properly. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to heat up the solder on the wire so that it's at melting temperature, and then we're going to go ahead and put it into the connector. And again, you can see that I have a dry tip on here, so I'm going to go ahead and wet the tip with some solder. I'm also going to put some more on the bottom side, and I'll show you why in a second here. But we're going to go ahead and hold the end just like so. This is really thick gauge wire, so if you're burning your fingers, you're holding it there too long. Okay, I can see it melting. So now I'm going to set the tip of my wire, or of my soldering, against the connector and heat that up until they're both at melting temperature. And then I'm very simply just going to slip the wire in there and let it cool down. Try to hold it as still as possible. There is some wiggle room there, but you do want to hold it until it sets up so that you don't get a cold solder or any air pockets in the solder. At this point, what you're going to want to do is look around your edges and make sure that solder comes all the way up, or almost all the way up, and all the way around. That makes sure that you actually have a solid solder connection inside there. If it doesn't look good, you can go ahead and reheat the whole thing back up and add some more solder. You can either add it through the hole in the side or through the top. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and tin your soldering iron, hold it against the connector, and then when you see the wire move, that means that it's up to melting temperature inside. And then at that point you can go ahead and feed a little bit more solder in there, just like so. And again, you don't want to overheat it, you don't want to underheat it, and it's all done by feel. So take your time and get it right, because it's important that this does not come off. Next step is going to be to put some shrink tubing over the connectors so that it helps keep them from shorting out by touching each other. First thing that we're going to want to do is check around the connector to make sure that there's no sharp edges or burrs from our soldering. If there is, you can just use a small file, go ahead and flatten them down, just to make sure that there's no sharp points that are going to poke through the shrink wrapping that we use, or shrink tubing I should say. Shrink tube did not come with the kit, so I had to go out to buy some, and went to Radio Shack. It was just right down the street and convenient, and they had a multi-package, and the largest one in there was the proper size. And you just need to make sure that it's large enough to slip over the connector. We've gone ahead and cut it, and it does shrink up in length, so we've cut enough to be about a ½ an inch towards the back and about a ¼ of an inch towards the front longer. We're going to go ahead and slip that over, bring it to the end, pull it back up about a ¼ of an inch or a little bit less, because it will shrink up. And then we're going to use a cigarette lighter. We're going to go ahead and shrink the tubing on. And you want to make sure that when you're using shrink tube that you evenly heat it all the way around, and that it's all shrunk, because if it's certain portions of it don't shrink properly, then it can slip and slide around. So you're going to want to make sure that it's evenly shrunk on there. At this point, we're going to use a razor blade. In this case, I actually have a box knife, and we're going to slide it just right over the top of the connector. Whew. Time for a new one. This one's a little bit dull. Just like so. And just for the heck of it, I'm going to reheat the end, get rid of any frayed edges, and there we go. We have a connector on the ESC side that's ready to go. Go ahead and repeat that process. One of the things I did is, and I'll show you here as I was soldering everything, is I used rubber bands to hold all the other wires out of the way, except for the one that I was working on. And it just helps keep you from making any mistakes and having a clean work area to deal with. So go ahead and get your connectors all taken care of, and we're one step closer to getting our Bajas on the road.